Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
We are here with Q&A 27.
27.
Yippee.
Good Lord.
All right. You ready to kick us off, Kate?
Probably. Hold on. No, neither one of us do mental math. Never mind. I was going to say, how many questions does that mean we've done, since we do 4 per thing? But I would need a calculator on my computer.
But I think maybe like the first Q&A we only did 3.
It's over 100, right? Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
Oh, well. Anyway, I wonder weird things. So
yes. We've answered a lot of questions, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right, so first one says, I'm new to the podcast and to DBT because I have recently discovered that I have RSD, which stands for Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, accompanied by my ADHD. My RSD is only hard for me to bear in certain, really specific circumstances. How well does DBT help with RSD?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, and Kate, I think you're going to touch on this too in your response. Neither of us are super familiar with rejection sensitive dysphoria. However, it's said, right? There's so many acronyms in the mental health world with big words, but rejection sensitive dysphoria. I don't work with a lot of clients who have an ADHD diagnosis, and this is something that specifically goes along with that. So I did a little bit of research, and so I'm going to read what a definition is that I found of RSD. And I found this through a website called attitudemeg.com, but attitude is ADD. Like attention deficit disorder. Yeah. So it sounds like it's specifically for people with ADHD. But this definition says, rejection sensitive dysphoria is extreme emotional sensitivity and pain triggered by the perception that a person has been rejected or criticized by important people in their life. It may also be triggered by a sense of falling short, failing to meet their own high standards or others' expectations. So when I read that definition, I had a thought that does sound a little bit like the intense fears of abandonment that can be present with borderline personality disorder. When I read a little bit more, it makes it very clear that RSD is not rooted in trauma, the same way that fears of abandonment or rejection can be rooted in trauma for someone with a BPD diagnosis. So the source may be a little bit different, but that was something where I was like, well, DBT is designed to help with that. So maybe there could be some benefit. Kate's going to talk a little bit about like maybe some skills briefly that can be helpful with that. But what I do feel pretty confident saying is that I don't think really any research has been done looking at how DBT would treat ADHD or specifically RSD that comes along with ADHD. My strong guess is that research does not exist. So we can't say for certain how much it would help, but those DBT skills that can be really helpful when you're worried about abandonment by someone may also be helpful if RSD is really getting triggered and touched on as well, was essentially my thought. So what about you, Kate?
Well, as you said, similarly, I have to admit ignorance. It's actually, I don't know, I didn't even hear the term until somewhat recently. So I get the impression, again, I could be wrong, that the sort of recognition of RSD as a specific thing and a specific thing tied to ADHD, like even that is relatively new.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we would have heard about it in school if it had been, joking on my own spit. If it had been, well researched by then. So I don't know much either. Similarly to what Michelle was talking about, I've worked with a couple of clients who have talked about for goodness sakes, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And just from their descriptions of it and some of the stuff that I was finding online, I imagine that emotion regulation skills, if I were going to speak broadly for DBT, would be the segment of skills that might be the most helpful. Because there is that, right? That extreme emotional reaction and pain. So my guess is that those would be helpful because they're specifically meant to address extreme emotional reactions and pain. Now, what's causing it, that's unique to everyone anyway, right? What is causing your extreme emotions and pain? But they're meant to help specifically with those, I guess, symptoms, whatever the cause is. So that's the module I would look at most closely. Motion regulation and always mindfulness because, always mindfulness. That's why.
Especially with ADHD. Mindfulness can be great with ADHD as a whole.
That is definitely the thing from DBT that I have most commonly applied to clients with ADHD. Though, similarly to Michelle, I don't have a huge number of people who fall into that category on my client list either. I will say, again, I don't think there's been a whole lot of research, but I found a couple of things in my brief amount of looking online that suggested that CBT might be a little bit better for some folks with RSD, but I can neither confirm nor deny this. Since it was more opinion-based things that I was reading that said that rather than research-based things that were saying that. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to look anywhere in DBT, I'd say look at mindfulness and emotion regulation. And also, I don't know, have tempered expectations.
Sure. Yeah.
Because we don't know. Right? And so, your mileage may vary. Mm-hmm. Which I guess those were very vague responses we both had to give, but I don't think we have enough information to be more specific.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Hopefully something will be helpful, but yeah, the research just isn't there to back it up really. So, yeah. Okay, the next one says, what can experienced DBT people tell me about practicing abstinence with bad eating and staying up all night? So this was a post in the Facebook group that someone had.
Yeah, not necessarily just specific to us.
Yep, yeah. But we wanted to give our thoughts on this.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. They say specifically, right, bad eating and staying up all night, but what I generalize that into is just, I don't know, impulses, right? Trying to rein in either impulsive and or habitual behavior. And so when I think about that, the first DBT thing that comes to mind is ride the wave, especially with things like bad eating. Staying up all night, I don't know, that's a little bit less of an impulse, because it's not a momentary thing. It's kind of a drawn out thing. All night lasts a long time. But bad eating can have that, I'm just craving this thing. I just want it right now, right? This sort of more impulsive flavor to the urge and to the act. So I think of ride the wave. And then for both of them, actually, I really think about mindfulness. I know, as I was just saying, because always mindfulness, but mindfulness can help on so many levels here, right? One, where is that urge coming from? Right? Why? Why are you wanting to eat shit? Why are you wanting to stay up all night? Right? If you can have mindfulness of those urges and also, dive a little deeper into maybe where they're coming from, you might be able to address the source as well and not just the, impulse or action on its own, right? I don't remember what episode it was in. Honestly, now that Michelle and I have two podcasts, I'm not even sure which podcast it was on. But right, for me, I know that I tend to stay up, not all night. I'm an early bird by nature, so staying up all night is nearly traumatic for me. But I'll stay up way too late when I'm really depressed because I don't want tomorrow to happen. It's that's where that comes from for me. So doing things that addressed my depression would actually do a lot to address that behavior, even though I'm not addressing that behavior specifically or, individually, right? So for this listener or anybody else that's having these kinds of behaviors, maybe try and find out what's underlying it a little bit. And that might also give you another avenue for trying to shift it, trying to change that behavior in some fashion or another. And mindfulness can help with that. Mindfulness can also help just not acting. Right? Being instead of doing as much, right? So I don't know, mindfulness is the skill, other than ride the wave that came up. And then this isn't DBT, but just anytime you're trying to shift a behavior, especially if it's really habitual or you have really strong impulses, you're probably going to fail some. It's almost guaranteed. You're going to fuck it up. And that's not, you, whoever you are. That's all of us, right? That's human nature talking. So just be prepared for some backsliding, some failure, some fucking up. And be compassionate with yourself when that happens. Because it's normal. It's natural. You're not a failure because you are failing to shift a behavior in that moment. In fact, failing to shift that behavior for one instance isn't meaning you're failing to shift that behavior. It just means backsliding, relapse, failure, however you want to word it or think about it, is an absolutely natural part of that kind of attempt in one's life. So be nice to yourself when you fuck it up. It's normal. It's natural. It's okay.
Yep. You took some of what I was going to
say. Did I? Oh, no, I didn't scroll down far enough.
Okay. I was just sitting there and I was like, whoopsie. This is very similar to what I was thinking.
You'll word it differently. I believe in you.
Exactly. Yep. So, I don't know. I think the first thing that I went to reading this, right, because we're talking about bat eating and we're talking about staying up all night. Two things. I don't know if both of those are occurring together for this listener. Those two things can go together for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You're staying up all night, and while you're staying awake, that's when you're turning to bat eating. But they don't always go together for everyone. Right? You may be staying up all night just laying in bed doing nothing, and then during the day, that's when you're noticing some... I would have find a different term besides bad eating.
I know bad eating, unhealthy, right? Or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Because kind of the first thing with the eating, if we talk about that first, is that, oh my gosh, like stuff with food is so complicated.
So is.
It's so complicated. And, Kate was really talking about this idea of having self-compassion and being mindful. And I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like, without judgment of yourself, just noticing what your emotional state is when it comes to the food choices you're making. Because it's so natural for us to use food to cope. It just is. I mean, the food we put in our body affects, and they've really discovered in the past, I don't know how many years, but pretty recently, like past probably like really 5 years, how much like our guts and our brains are connected.
Oh, yes.
There's so much out there about that. It's fascinating. I don't know nearly as much as I wish I did, but basically the foods we consume really affect how we feel, and how we feel affects our food choices. So it's this two-way thing that's really always occurring. And when you're practicing mindfulness, like Kate was talking about, then you're going to be more in tune with, well, I was feeling this certain way emotionally, and I've noticed that when I feel that way emotionally, this is the kind of food I tend to go towards. That's just what happens, right? So not being hard on yourself about that, not being judgmental of yourself about that, but I think the biggest thing when it comes to like changing what we're eating is we have to first be aware and we have to notice it. I also am a big fan of not, and again, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not anything like that, but there's a lot of psychology behind not restricting yourself. So for example, unless a doctor, like a medical provider, has told you that you have to cut out certain foods, or like you have to cut out certain groups, right? Like you have to reduce your sugar consumption, for example. If there is like a medical cause for that, of course, follow your doctor's advice and recommendation. But otherwise, I hear this a lot when I work with clients. They're like, I'm not supposed to eat this. I'm trying not to eat that, so on and so forth. They have a big list of like should not eats. And Kate and I talk about the word should a lot.
Yeah.
And I try to encourage people to look the other way and like, okay, let's leave all that on the table. That you can eat sugar, that you can eat this, that you can eat whatever you want to eat, And let's just focus on like what are maybe some newer, healthier choices that you want to add into that mix. So rather than when you open up your fridge and you're looking at all the things that you've told yourself you can't have, open up your fridge and look at all the things that you're wanting to turn your attention towards. Like, oh, I've said I want to eat more vegetables. Well, look, you know, these are the vegetables that I can choose from, or that kind of a thing, without telling yourself, you know, I have to not eat chocolate. You can eat chocolate and you can eat vegetables. So anyways, that's my little rant there about food. But yeah, totally second what Kate said about mindfulness, just being really in tune with what's going on for you when you're making certain food choices. And I thought about this too when it came to sleep. This is where I was like, Kate and I are on the same page. Because there might be a few different things driving this staying up all night. For some people, that is feelings of willfulness. I have certainly experienced that at times in my life, where I'm just like, I don't want to go to bed. Like, I'm going to stay up and do X, Y, and Z. Because I need to get those things done. Or that kind of an idea. Of
course yours would be from things you need to get done.
Yeah, that's what it is for me. Or sometimes it has been honestly like, well, I really wanted to watch this show.
Okay.
And that feels like the time, you know, nighttime can feel like this time where work is done. So now play can begin at the end of the day. Like, I've done all the work. Okay, so now between going to bed on time where I can get sufficient sleep or staying up to do fun things, I'm going to just choose the fun things, right? So it can't be that, but I also made a note that it would be really important to tune in and notice if staying up all night is tied into depression or anxiety for you. Because depression can absolutely affect sleep. Anxiety can absolutely affect sleep. And it really can be this common combination that, especially if depression or anxiety is driving the staying up all night, then it can lead to trying to cope by eating. And your body trying to regulate in that way with food when something is off within you emotionally. So I think long and short of what we're saying with this one is that in order to get to a place of practicing abstinence and making better food choices and trying to get better and more sleep, you just first have to really tune in to what's led up to this behavior in the first place. I think that's
what's driving it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. What's driving it? Yeah.
Okay, so the next one says, I am trying to use radical acceptance and it's not going well. My wedding anniversary is the 30th of, that's June, right? Yeah, June.
Yeah, this was a while ago.
Yeah, true. We responded, we swear. My wedding anniversary is the 30th of June and it will be 20 years. On the 1st of June, my wife chose to end our marriage. I'm having a hard time coping.
Yeah, and I'm super curious to hear your thoughts, Kate, because, I mean, you've been through a divorce, and I haven't. I mean, I had an 8-year-long relationship end, and we were living together and things like that, but...
It's different.
It's different. Yep. I really think it's different when you made vows to someone, and especially a marriage of 20 years. I mean,
geez.
Holy cow. And you were married for quite a while.
Yeah, I was married for 8, but together for 15, so yep.
Yeah. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. But the thing that actually came to mind for me with this one is that last sentence of I'm having a hard time coping. And this may sound really weird. So I'm hoping this will make sense, right? Because as we're recording this, I am pregnant. And, I went through a birthing class to help prepare me for labor. And they talk a lot about this idea of coping, right? Like, how are you going to cope with contractions when you're in labor? What does that mean? What does that look like? And I think sometimes culturally we have this idea that coping means that we're fine. Like, if we're coping, it means we're not feeling bad. That's the goal. The goal is to not feel bad. So if you're feeling bad, then obviously you're not coping. I think it's kind of this overarching idea around what coping means. And what we talked about in birthing class is that isn't true. Like, basically, if you see a woman who is coping with labor pains, she is probably going to be making some sounds. She is going to be doing some things. She's not going to be sitting there silent and stoic. The more she's doing, the more it means she's probably coping. Because it is kind of honestly like this ride the wave sort of an idea of when things are really hard, how are you riding that wave? Coping doesn't mean that there are no waves to begin with. It's all about what you're doing to get through the really challenging emotions, but it's not about not feeling them. So I hope that's making sense. Like, I kind of think of it as when, you know, I'm talking about like the physical pain of labor, but like the emotional pain of divorce, it's kind of like, how do I work with that rather than try to not feel it or just act like it isn't there? Because again, I've kind of realized that's a lot of times what people think of when they're talking about coping.
Yeah, it's a cultural narrative, at least here in America.
Yeah, if you're coping, it means you're fine. No. Coping means that you're probably admitting, I'm not fine. This is really hard. And also, this is what I am doing to get through it. So it might be that this listener, you know, who knows? Maybe what this listener was kind of meaning is that, like, I don't feel like I have things to help me get through this time. Like, I don't know what to turn to. I don't know what, quote unquote, like coping skills I can use. I just kind of feel like I'm floundering in this emotional pain rather than figuring out how to work with it. Yeah, how to weather it. Exactly. Yeah. And if that is the case for this listener, again, another thought I had was like, well, that's because you're grieving. You're grieving. And the thing about grief is sometimes grief brings us to a screeching halt. Everything pauses, right? Showering pauses, eating pauses, sleep pauses. Like, our body literally kind of can go into this state of shutdown when grief is really intense. And that may be part of what's going on. And Kate and I have talked about this idea before on the podcast at various points in time. That just becomes about like making the steps like as small as humanly possible until you do something. Smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Until you can take a bite of food, until you can try to get a little bit of sleep, that kind of a thing. But, you know, one of the huge things that I recommend to people, generally speaking, outside, this is really anything DBT specific, but when I have clients who are going through divorce, try to find other people who have also been through divorce. There are lots of books out there. There are lots of support groups. But chances are, because divorce is pretty common, you probably just know some people in your life, coworkers, friends, family members who have been there, and turn to them and talk to them. And by talk to them, I mean it may just be most helpful to listen to them. If you don't know their stories, it can be helpful to just hear their story and what it was like for them in their grieving process of going through a divorce. Just to know that, as cliche as it is, but like it is the truth, that you are not alone. May be helpful. So that's the stuff that I recommend.
Yeah, I like all of that. So the first thing, that I want to say is just to really validate. I think, Michelle, you spoke really beautifully to the idea of not being okay. And I don't know, one of the things that I find myself having to say with some regularity to clients is they're like, I'm going through this awful thing and I feel terrible and I don't want to feel terrible. And as callous as this may seem, it's not coming from a callous place. Like, that's too bad. feeling terrible is appropriate. That's how you're supposed to feel right now.
Yep.
Like, why on God's green earth would you be feeling okay right now? Right? And so I thought about that also with this person who wrote in of like, yeah, of course you're having a hard time. Of course shit isn't going well. Like, especially when you're on, I don't know what the right way of putting that is, when you're not the one who asked for the divorce.
Yeah.
Right? When you're not the instigating party. In my particular divorce, I was the instigating party, and it was still hard. Like, Michelle, you brought up the idea of vows, right? I take the idea of being a woman of my word very seriously. Right? Like, I try very hard to never promise a thing unless I have pretty close to abject certainty that I can and will do the thing. Or won't, whatever the promise is about. Right? You know, life can always intervening. If I promise to be at your wedding shower and then a semi runs into me on my way there, well, I don't feel like I didn't keep my promise. Right? That's outside of my control. But for the most part, keeping my promises, stuff like that is very important to me. And I felt like I was breaking my vows, right? I had vowed to stay with this human being for the rest of my life. And that hit really hard. It felt like a failure. There's all these feelings that I didn't expect, especially with how fucking nearly ubiquitous divorce is in America. I thought that it'd be like, this is culturally normal. This will be fine. I'm the one asking for it. Like, pish. And then I was so wrong, right? So I can only imagine that being on the receiving end, right? Being the person who's like being divorced, right? Rather than asking for a divorce. That's got to hit even harder, right? So I don't know. I just want to add my voice to what Michelle was saying of it's okay to not be okay. It's in fact expected, right, appropriate, to not be okay, and maybe to not be okay for a long fucking time. You were with this human being for 20 years. There's nothing in here that says one way or the other, but I don't know. I don't know why I get this impression, but it sounds almost like this person was also surprised by it. Mm-hmm. Which is even worse, right? Then sort of you can see it coming and then it actually comes, right? Like anyway. So just try and leave room for the appropriate amount of feeling shitty. Because there's a lot of appropriate amount of feeling shitty in circumstances like that. And then more specifically to the, saying I'm trying to use radical acceptance and it's not going well. Also don't know exactly what this person meant by this, but I will reiterate something that Michelle and I have said before and will continue to say, which is radical acceptance is a process. Right? Like, it sounds like when this person wrote this, like they'd kind of just found out. Like, it was really close on the heels of when they found out that their wife wanted a divorce. I don't expect radical acceptance to be, I don't know, going well that close to the thing that you're having to radically accept, right? Yep. The going well, I think, close to the actual wounding. I think radical acceptance, quote unquote, going well just means you have it in mind and are striving in that direction. Yep. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that you're feeling any better, not necessarily that you've actually accepted anything, not necessarily that you're at peace, like none of that shit. It just means, aha, I think this is a good place for radical acceptance. And I'm gonna try and get there. Congratulations, radical acceptance is going well for you.
Yeah.
'Cause fuck! Like, I don't know, when you have like a severe wound, it'd be like, I don't know. Let's translate it into the physical, because sometimes people can grasp that a little bit better, have more compassion that way. If you just had some sort of major surgery, let's say someone, the hospital took out a couple of organs. I've been there. Right? You wouldn't 3 days after getting out of the hospital be like, well, my healing isn't going well because it's not done yet. Like, why did you think it would be done? Of course it's not done. You just had organs taken out. You're going to be on bed rest for a couple of weeks, my friend. Right? It's a process. It's a process that takes time. You're not going to have made much progress necessarily quickly. Just the fact that you're on that road, that you have that desire, that intention, that sort of destination in mind, that's huge. A lot of people don't even get that far that fast. So I would say Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Maybe switch the narrative. It can do a surprising amount of difference to be like, well, this isn't going well, and shift that into, you know what, I'm really doing a great job of this. It's just going to take time. The experience shifts a lot just with changing that narrative. Even if you're not making any more progress than you were before, just recognizing that you're doing pretty well. Just to have the intention. I think I've said that 18 times now, so I'm going to try and back off from that exact point. But the other thing that I wanted to throw out before we finished is just radical acceptance doesn't have to stand alone. Right? I think, in fact, that it's best used in combination with other things because radical acceptance is a process. So what can you do right now? What are some skills that you can use in this exact moment that are not a process? They're not going to take time. They're for right here and right now to make right here and right now an amount better, which radical acceptance over a long enough timeline, I suppose it does that, but it's not really immediate. It's not going to make you feel better right now. So I think of self-soothe because I always think of self-soothe when you're hurting, right? When you're hurting, when you're sad, when you're upset, when you're feeling abandoned. I think of self-soothe. I think about please skills, right? Give yourself some more resources to work with by trying to keep up on your please skills as much as possible. And then the other thing I think about is, I always like accepts better, but accepts or improve. Really, either one of them could work just fine. For some distraction, right? One of the things that can happen with grief or other wounds is that they become kind of all-encompassing. And we all need breaks, right? So, yeah, self-soothe, please, accepts, improve, things like that. Use them in combination with your striving toward radical acceptance, because radical acceptance is going to take a long while, and you deserve to have an amount of a break before that process is done. So, those are my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciated all of that because, yeah, that was good stuff. That's all I have to say. I'm not as articulate as I want to be, but good stuff. Everything you said. Okay, we're on to the last one, which is the longest one today.
By far.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so this one says, "Hi, Kate and Michelle. I absolutely love your podcast and your wonderful approach to teaching DBT. I especially love the way you take extra care to help us avoid the pitfalls of shaming or invalidating ourselves in certain skills, like in the comparison skill, for example." That is basically what you were just doing, Kate.
It's true.
Just going to pause right there and say that. Okay, continuing on. I just listened to the radical acceptance episode, and I'm wondering if there's also an aspect to radical acceptance that you could address when a situation isn't necessarily unchangeable, as it was in Michelle's situation where she can no longer consider the possibility of becoming a professional dancer, or in Kate's situation with her inability to conceive naturally. I am in a situation where I've been experiencing severe chronic pain in my eyes for 3.5 years. And I know there's value in my accepting what is happening to stop arguing with reality, though in my case, I'm not looking to accept it as something unchangeable. There are many cases of people getting out of chronic pain, so I need to keep hope alive that I will be one of those cases. Which leads me to my second question, which is that because my brain is constantly receiving input from my pain signals in my body that there is danger, there's a lot of anxiety being created. Not only by my stressful thoughts, but also within my physiology, separate from anything cognitive. I've been living in this extreme state of anxiety, of fight or flight, for so many years now, and I am becoming afraid that I'll never be able to return to a state of regulation of my nervous system. Many of these DBT skills feel to me like I'm taking a Tylenol for a gaping wound in my side that's bleeding uncontrollably or something. They just simply aren't strong enough. Even the face in ice water skill does nothing to shift my state of anxiety. Are there any extra strength skills for severe chronic situations like mine that might be able to begin to help me down-regulate?
There's so much I want to say.
There's a lot here. Yeah.
All right, let's see if I can not write a verbal novel right now. First of all, I just want to say that I too have chronic pain. So I want to begin with just empathizing. So many different things. I have an injury in my back that has chronic pain. I have I'm rather buxom. And that causes its own set of chronic pains, knee, blah, 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 blah. Chronic pain is a thing that I have lived with for quite a long time. So I really understand the stress of that. So I'm just going to shift into just the radical acceptance part of that, and then we'll get to more in a second, which is radical acceptance can certainly be a for now sort of skill and still leave space for hope. Right? So you're not radically accepting, or you don't want to, and I totally understand not wanting to radically accept the concept that this is forever. What you're radically accepting is that this is for now. I don't know what the future will look like, but right now, this is the situation I'm in. And that's fine. There's absolutely room for that. Right? In fact, I'd say not inconsiderate. That's not the word I want. Help me, Michelle. Small. Not small, but there's another word I want that doesn't mean small.
Consequential?
No.
I don't know if that's it.
Oh, well, whatever. A not small portion of, not inconsiderate, whatever. God damn it, I hate it when I can't find a word. Anyway, a lot of people, the radical acceptance situations are a thing that are for right now, not forever. Right? Absolutely, there is space for that. It's just the wording that you're using for your radical acceptance, right? It's not I accept that I'm going to be in chronic pain with my eyes for the rest of time. It's, I'm accepting that this is where I am right now. Yep. Yeah. And specifically, again, for the chronic pain, one of the skills that I would recommend the most is leaning just really hard into mindfulness. Dan Siegel, who's one of the quote-unquote sort of fathers of mindfulness in Western civilization, one of the first things he did with it was take it into hospitals and use it to help people with chronic pain and or terminal illnesses. So I found one book that he co-wrote with someone that's called Outsmart Your Pain, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion to Help You Leave Chronic Pain Behind. But if you just search for mindfulness and chronic pain, there's actually a lot of books out there by other authors as well. So you might lean in that direction because there's actually a lot of research showing that mindfulness can do a lot to help folks with chronic pain be in less pain. Something that's a little bit more extra strength than maybe I don't know. I don't think that DBT is a super surface level of mindfulness, but there's certainly more depth to mindfulness available than what you get just from DBT. I guess the other things that I wanted to say were less about skill and more about just more validation and empathy. I've had chronic pain, but it's not extreme pain, so I don't have the hyperarousal necessarily of my nervous system from that. But from trauma in my childhood and other things throughout my life, I have had a lot of consistent activation of my fight or flight, right, of my limbic system. One of the things that can mean is that I've had too much of my life, really, with a huge amount of cortisol in my system, right, which is one of the stress hormones. And yeah, that has huge impacts, right? I've had a tendency to have a pretty shitty immune system. That's one of the big things that it does, because it lowers your immune system to have a lot of cortisol in your life. I suppose that's accurate. In your body is what I meant, though. And yeah, it's just, it's hard, but it's not hopeless. I guess what I would want to say to this person is that same kind of hope that they're striving to keep alive around their chronic pain, keeping that same hope alive around helping your nervous system, as you put it, downregulate again. It doesn't have to be forever. It takes a while to unlearn, right? Your body has gotten to the state that it's in naturally, normally, for lack of a better way of putting it, healthily, right? Like, it's responding the way it's quote unquote supposed to the signals that it's getting. And so that might take a while to unlearn, essentially, right? When your body has been used to functioning in a certain way for a long time, it takes a while to shift it back out of that. But you can shift it back out of that. So I hear in what this person is writing a real tenacity with their hope. And I would just say, since you have such tenacity in your hope around your chronic pain going away, see if you can't shove into that same tenacious space and when that does, I'm going to be able to bring my my physiology back into a more quote-unquote normal. range of activation. It's going to be hard. It won't happen immediately, but it's totally doable. So not a skill, I guess, just a validation and validation of hope.
Yeah. Great response, Kate.
Thanks.
I loved it. Yeah, so, yeah, kind of like this listener was saying, there's sort of two parts to this, right? There's the radical acceptance piece, and then this, are there any extra strength skills
I do like
for
that
chronic
phrasing.
situations piece? Yeah, totally. So I'll address both. I'll talk about the radical acceptance one first, which you already talked about really nicely, Kate. So I don't know if I have too much to add on. You know, this listener compared their situation to the situations that we talked about in the radical acceptance episode. I think sometimes what can happen, and I mean, we were just answering a question about radical acceptance with the listener before this, whose marriage is ending, right? They're trying to radically accept that. And what I think happens so much, if we think of it like a path, is we are going along in our lives on one single-minded path. For me, there was this single-minded path. I'm going to become a professional dancer. For you, Kate, it was like this single-minded path, right? I'm going to be a mom.
Yep.
For that other listener, it's like this single-minded path. I am married to this person, right? I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this person. Like, we are on this path so strongly that we're not even considering other possibilities, because that is just what we want. That is just what we see happening for our lives. And then when we do reach kind of this dead end, well, then we've got to turn around and go back and start over in a lot of ways. And it's hard to accept that that path isn't leading to the outcome that we had hoped for. So I think that's how radical acceptance shows up for a lot of people. But I really like that this listener is bringing in a different experience of radical acceptance, which is that they know that they have this chronic pain. It really is just about figuring out, and this is how I interpret it anyways, like it really is just figuring out what it looks like to live with it, with the possibility that it isn't going to be there forever. So I almost think of it for this listener, like rather than like this single path, this listener might actually have lots of different paths before them. They have to kind of figure out which path to take that's maybe going to lead to the best outcome with the chronic pain that they are dealing with in their eyes. Which path do I go down, right? And I kind of view it as how radical acceptance might look here is recognizing that you may try one path, right? You may try a certain kind of treatment or work with a certain provider. I don't know. And you might go into that with a lot of hope. This will be the thing that helps, kind of an idea. And then you try it, and then reaching a place of radical acceptance where it's like, oh, maybe that's not the thing, right? Maybe this medication actually isn't working, because they said that I would notice the effects of it within 2 months, and I've been taking it for 4, and nothing's getting better. Oh, so now I have to accept that maybe this isn't the treatment for me. Okay, go back. Now what's the next option, right? And hey, you can do that for as long as you want to do that for. But I kind of view it that way, as like radical acceptance is maybe not getting super invested in one path, because that just might not be the path. But you can continue exploring as many paths as you want to. I think that's completely okay. It doesn't mean that you have to sit there and be like, none of these paths, right? I hope that's not the case. I hope there is a path that will work for you. But sometimes we have to, in order to find that path, accept the smaller dead ends that might wind up pointing us in that direction to the path that actually will work. So those were my thoughts on the radical acceptance piece. The extra strength skills for chronic situations piece. Here's what I will say about, this listener is referencing the temperature skill within TIP. That acronym, yeah, that is meant to be for acute anxiety, panic attacks, right? Short-term, strong peaks in anxiety. That is what that skill is designed for. It wasn't designed to treat kind of chronic, like you were talking about, Kate, like chronic high levels of cortisol.
Yeah, chronic activation.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't designed for that. So I totally get it when this listener's like, hey, tried that, didn't really work. I'm like, yep, that wouldn't work for what you're struggling with. What I actually think can be more helpful is the ABC skill from emotion regulation. And the reason why I think that can be really helpful with chronic situations is because the A in that acronym is all about like kind of this idea of building a life worth living that DBT talks about. Finding either small daily activities that bring you joy, help you feel good. And also, because there's kind of two sides to the A, there's that piece. And then there's this other more long-term piece about figuring out what your values are and how do you live in line with your values. And I also like the B with the build mastery. When you have things in your life that are outside of your control, I think especially because of chronic pain, where it's like, well, I can't do the thing that I used to do in the same way anymore because of the pain I'm dealing with. If you focus on building mastery, it's about still finding those things that you are able to still do and like be good at and that you feel competent doing when there may be a lot of things that feel like they're slipping out of your hands. So ABC is really all about like, what are you going to tune into? And I think there are a lot of other DBT skills that could be helpful for the severe chronic anxiety. I mean, Lord, make sure you're using please.
Yeah.
Please use please, right? That's the starting point. Use please to the best of your ability and also really try to make sure that you're making an intentional effort to add in some kind of a skill, or not necessarily skill, but like an activity that leads to you feeling calm, where your body is given that chance to really like feel safe, if that makes sense. Maybe what your happy place is sitting and doing Sudoku on your couch with a blanket. And that's when you notice like my heart rate is slower. Like I just feel good. Or there's certain music that you listen to that really feels like it brings you into a relaxed state of mind. Try to find those activities and try to make them a regular part of your life. That's what's going to help with the chronic anxiety. Probably more than anything, is because we got to find those opportunities where, yeah, your body's not going to be in fight or flight. Those things that do make you feel safe. So ABC is really good for that stuff. So that's what I would actually recommend.
I like it. Okay. I guess we're wrapping up. That's it for today. So if you have more questions that you'd like answered in a future Q&A, please do go ahead and email us, dbtmepodcast@gmail.com, and or go ahead and post in the Facebook group. We do mine from there as well for our Q&A episodes. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT and Me